so much for joining me. Longlegs is such an interesting project because it was this independent little horror movie that blew up and people are completely obsessed with and has sort of taken on a life of its own. Were you expecting expecting any of this? Sort of talk to me about that. Put me in your shoes here because I'm trying to imagine like working on a project like this and then have it, have people dress up for Halloween and it just must be so like weird and cool and
It's pretty surreal. It's pretty surreal. I was just actually saying that to the marketing team. So yeah, I don't know. We when we started working on Longlegs, it was a really small project. It was like,
mm,
they would just Chris from Oddfellows, he approached me and he was like, "Hey, we got this thing. Are you interested?" And I was like, "Yeah, cool." And it, as they were developing it, it grew into a slightly bigger project, but it was always like a lower budget film. And and just the way everything there just kind of happened, I guess the way the universe kind of wanted it to happen, everything fell in place. Um, i- i- as we were working on it, they hadn't had the leading man wasn't cast yet. Oz had some
mm,
ideas of who we wanted it to be, etc., etc. And we were trying to struggle through budget of what he wanted this makeup, and we are like, how do we make this all happen? We had to build all the dolls, which had a huge portion of our budget. Um, and Oz had some real specific ideas about the dolls, and they had to be likenesses. So, there was a lot of things involved, like sculpting to make them look like the characters in the film, etc. Um, but yeah, and then eventually, kind of when Nick Cage jumped on board, I think the whole project sort of got momentum,
mm,
and it just happened very quickly from there, right? I think they started principal photography in January, like the 16th or something of 2023. And then I think Nick Cage came on board sometime in February. And it just like we are, from our perspective, we're like, oh, we have to make this character. And oh boy, it's a big name actor. And so it's just like we had to do something pretty quickly that was what everybody wanted. And then the film just kind of went from there. And then when it was done, I was like, oh, it's an okay movie. It's great. It's cool. It's like I never expected it to be what it was. It was marketed beautifully, and then it really became what it was supposed to be, I think. Um, it just started off small for us because I'm on the kind of on the inside, so we don't see it
mm.
through the same eyes as most people. And as we're creating these characters, I see them every day, and I'm like, oh, this is the guy, this is the that. So it doesn't the impact isn't as big on me. And then the movie went away in terms of like we were finished with it, and then it was handed off to Neon, and Neon did their magic on it.
Yeah.
And when it came back, it was like this beautiful art piece. And I was like, oh man, okay, I'd forgotten that we had done these things. And it was just this like thing. And then it all just sort of exploded. So it was
Do
pretty
you feel
funny.
like you're a harsh critic of your own work? Is
Oh,
that maybe
the
why it was
worst, the
difficult for you
worst.
to, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, we're absolutely, I mean, that's the thing as an artist, you like, all I see are the mistakes. I never see the
Mm.
good stuff. So it's kind of weird because other people have to remind you of those things. They're like, oh, that worked. And you're like, yeah, I guess it did, but I think I could have done it better.
Well, that's actually a really interesting point I'd like to dig into because, as you mentioned, your budget here is finite. The amount of time that you have is finite. You're not working on a $200 million picture,
Yeah, yeah.
and you are a perfectionist. So, like, how does that work? At what point do you tell yourself, like, I need to step away from this? I need to stop sculpting? Because, like, you seem like the kind of person where if somebody gave you 6 months to work on something, you're going to take all 6 months and make it as but you obviously don't have that. So like how does that work from your perspective where you have to just at some point say this is good enough and let's go with it kind of a thing.
It's usually time. Usually
Mm.
time just stops us. We're like,
Yeah.
we just keep working. Like on this project specifically, once I think when Nick Cage came on board, I can't remember exactly, but I think we had 3 weeks to complete or 2 weeks to complete the entire makeup and the character. So I pre-designed a bunch of I pre-designed the character. We went through different iterations of it. and Oz found something that resonated with him. And then when Nick Cage came aboard, he was like, "Oh, I." They had a meeting, a dinner meeting, and he had some very specific character ideas. And then Oz said, "Hey, Nick has some ideas, and you guys should talk." And we kind of hashed it out, and then we had very little time to produce this character. And also what complicated it on from my side, we usually need a scan or a life cast of an actor to build a makeup on them that fits them. And in Nick's case, because he came on so late, there was one available in LA. We were trying to source it. There was only one floating around because we didn't have the opportunity to scan him. So we eventually found it. But in the meantime, I had actually made a digital likeness of him. I'd sculpted one in the computer so that we can
Mm.
get the process going as quickly as possible. So by the time we kind of got the live casting, we scanned that, merged them together, and then we were like, maybe 2 weeks out at the most, and then we could start producing all the pieces. So for us, it was like right up to the last minute, basically. The first, no, the day before Nick actually shot, I was trying on different pieces on him so we could kind of like
Mm.
finalize some of the character aspects that they liked. We had made versions of what they were after. So like between him and Oz, we could sit in the trailer and be like, oh, let's try this nose, let's try these ears, let's try, there were the few things we were kind of like Mr. Potato hitting some stuff together until Nick was like, that's the character, that's the one I want. So yeah, it was for us, it was like literally up to the last minute. Um,
And correct me if I'm wrong, I read an interview with Oz where he said what was on the page was that this was just somebody that had sort of cheap, bad plastic surgery.
yeah,
And
yeah.
you sort of took that and run with it. So like that's pretty vague. So then how do you as a designer go, okay, this is what I think that that might look like? And then
Um,
obviously you have collaborations with your actor as well. But like to have that much room must be kind of a blessing and a curse, I guess.
It is, yeah. It's fun. It's Oz Perkins. I've worked on a few of these projects now, and they're always like that. He really trusts you with his
Mm,
vision. He's like, this is what I want. Here's some references of what I think it is, and then go for it. And then, we kind of like create a character, and then I go back to him and I go, what do you think of this? And he'll be like, nah, I don't like that, or yeah, nailed it. And then we'll go further from there. He really allows us lots of freedom, which is amazing from my perspective. That doesn't happen very often, so it's really great. Um, and on this one, it's just like I said, we designed the character beforehand. I did several designs on it, and Oz eventually found one, and then we spoke about some blotch patch plastic surgery ideas from before, and the concept that really, and Oz never mentions this, but he had a discussion with me once, and he's like, this guy, he's really like he's like the 70s rocker guy, and what really uh why he looks like this is he's like full on in love with the devil. Like he's got a crush on the devil, and this plastic surgery is him trying to make himself look beautiful for the devil. So he's like, because he's a doll maker, he's like trying to make himself something that he thinks the devil might love. And it's this like old school plastic surgery that's kind of gone wrong. It's like it's just not a modern thing. So yeah, that was sort of like the main idea behind him, and I just kind of took it from there. We went quite extreme, and there were some talks of him being, because he's making these dolls. At one point, he had burns, and then we thought, no, that might be a bit too grotesque, and we pulled that back. And we kept it very subtle. And the
mm,
the the white face, that was a kind of like a collaboration or a discussion between Oz and Nick Cage, where Nick Cage loved the idea of being kind of like a Phantom of the Opera, where he gets revealed, and that's the over the top performance. The character, he really found his character in the Lon Chaney Phantom of the Opera, the original silent film.
mm.
Um, and that's kind of partially where the nose comes from, the upturned nose, and in the white facial makeup. Nick was very set on that. We first tried a few versions of where it was just skin tone, and he didn't think it took the character far enough away, that he wanted that sunblock look. Like he never goes outside. When he goes outside, he's protecting his skin that was damaged, like he's really trying to still look after himself, even though he's like super sad and, like a murderer. but he was just he's obsessed with the devil basically. So it kind of like yeah, we found the character in some conversations as we were making the makeup, I guess, is the best way to kind of describe that.
And okay, so this is kind of a two-parted question. One, I've read that Nick Cage was sort of very into the prosthetics and he wanted to disappear as much as possible, which is great. But then we kind of have to acknowledge that Nicolas Cage is one of the most recognizable actors in the world. It doesn't matter how old you are, you have a different Nick Cage, whether it be Leaving Las Vegas,
Yeah,
National Treasure, or whatever.
yeah.
Everyone knows what this guy's face looks like. So he comes to you and he's like, turn me into somebody else. I'm totally game. I'm really fascinated by this. Like, how do you feel like? Because that would terrify me. But like, how do you kind of like when you have an actor that's that willing, but then also like that famous, to the point where so many people who watched the movie like did not know that that's who it was until the credits rolled. Like I've had that conversation with so many
Oh, that's good
people.
news. I
So
didn't
so
know.
yeah, so mission
That's great.
accomplished. Mission
Cool.
accomplished, but yeah, but talk me through like when you have somebody that's like a literal icon. I mean, it's hard to kind of understate that, I think, like the level of transformation.
Yeah, that was a difficult one because not only, from our perspective, are we trying to find a character that works, it works for the director, works for the actor, works for us as we're designing it, and is practically we can apply it practically, actually do something where it's not a bunch of CG changing stuff.
Mm.
Not only is that a challenge, but then also, when Nick Cage is in the project, he sells tickets. So he is a recognizable actor, and that's why he's in a film very often. And in this instance, it was like, we want Nick Cage, but it can't be Nick Cage. So, that was a difficult tightrope to walk. So we had to kind of like balance that in terms of like from the producer's perspective, they're like, we need him to be recognizable. And then from the artistic perspective, from the director's perspective, he's like, yes, recognizable, but he's a character. So find that middle ground. And I think we only really nailed it with the help of Nick Cage, to be honest with you. If he wasn't so into it, he kind of like the nose. The nose is a weird thing because I was like fighting him, saying, I don't think the nose is going to work on this character. And he's like, no, 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 no. I want Phantom of the Opera nose. And I was like, Nick, that sounds cool because you like the character, but when we do that, it's going to be silly. And he's like, trust me, I want Phantom of the Opera nose. And that's how I'm going to find the character. And I was like, okay, so we made him a smaller version, like a very subdued, almost like a subtle plastic surgery nose, maybe a little in the Michael Jackson realm.
Mm.
Um, Old Michael Jackson, not later Michael Jackson, and I put it on him, and he was like, "No, that's not the nose. This is not what I want. I want that extreme nose." And I was like, "Man, I don't know if that's gonna work." So Oz came on board and was like, "Yeah, I think it'll work. Let's try it." So we went off, we made one, we came back, and as we put it on, Nick's like, "That's the character." And he spent the afternoon in the trailer just enjoying his face, his new face, basically. And then I got the word, they're like, that's what we're going to go for. We had eyebrows, we had lots of different things we were trying too. We had like more effeminate eyebrows to go with the plastic surgery look, kind of like the tucked back skin. And all of those things were sort of like, as Nick was finding his acting, those things were taken off the slate, so to speak. So
Mm-hmm.
just it works. It totally works. It's like he became who he wanted to be for the film, basically. Um,
So I have time for one final question, and then I also want to give you like if there's something I haven't asked, please, because I know you do lots of interviews, and I want to make sure that you have space to get all your thoughts out. But there's something that you mentioned that's really interesting, which is the practical effects, right? Because like that's something that more and more I feel like is an art that's disappearing, and we're leaning
yeah.
into digital. So talk to me a little bit about that because I want people to understand the scope of the practical effects and what that means in terms of the work that you have to do.
Yeah, the practical effects are always tricky because it goes unnoticed in films half the time, and it's
Mm-hmm.
it's a staggering amount of work. Um, it's something that gets overlooked these days because everybody thinks everything's CG, but in fact, there's still quite a bit of practical effects in movies, and they are, and especially in this film, most of it's practical. I think
Mm-hmm.
there's like one CG shot that involves a doll, or two maybe. But yeah, we had to, we have to like basically sculpt people's likenesses or scan them and digi-sculpt them, and then do 3D printed outputs of them. And then on top of that, everything we do, the problem with practical effects is it's an additional process. We add on to people or add on to characters. We can never take away. That's where we sort of lean on the CG if they have to like make them skinnier or whatever. But yeah, I think practical effects are great in movie because it's a tactile thing. People, your brain kind of knows that that is a real thing, even if it's not perfect. Look at Yoda as an example, in Star Wars. Like it's the puppet itself is kind of like terrible, but everybody loves it because it is a character, right? And it's a character your
Mm-hmm.
brain is like the light is right on its skin. It's a real thing. Your brain starts telling you, oh, this works. This is real. This is like an actual thing. Whereas with sometimes with a little bit with CG, when it's overdone, I think that people look at it and there's like a subconscious knowing that it's not real, you know? You don't
Mm-hmm.
even realize it, but it is not real skin and real things, and they don't react in exactly the same way as good as they are. I mean, some of it's phenomenal, but some of it, you just after a while, if you go back to some CG that personally, even stuff that I thought was like incredible at the time, if I go back to it now, I'm like, oh, yeah, I can kind of see that it's not real, you know?
Yeah.
Whereas I go back to some older films, like from the 80s, and their camp, doesn't matter what they are, even if they're terrible, you're like, that was cool. And you enjoy that kind of like real thing that you're looking at. So yeah, practical effects in film are a staggering amount of work. Like it's because it is all hand sculpted, handmade. It's like artisans in clay sitting there sculpting, and then we have to make molds and we have to run this material. Now there's silicones. In the old days, we used latex products. But yeah, and then painting them is a trick, and then putting the hairs in one by one, and it's lots of work. Yeah. Literally, if we're doing anything with hair, like a beard, for instance, like every single hair gets placed into the silicone individually. Um, so yeah, it's like skin pores get painted on, it takes a whole village of people to do one character. So it's never just me or never just like I design a lot of it, and then I do a lot of the work myself, but then my team is just incredible, and there's so many people, and everyone specializes in their little part of it. And yeah, and then we just at the end of the day it goes to set, and sometimes it's not even seen. But yeah, no, it's a good thing.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for letting me pick your brain. I feel like I always say this, but every time I do an interview with hair and makeup in particular, I want to watch the movie again because then I get to pick up on all these little things you mentioned. But thank you so much, and I wish you the best of luck. And I want you to be proud of your work and realize that Longlegs is going to be a big part of this legacy of these characters that you mentioned. It's really become iconic in its own right, and that's just fascinating. So thank you
That's
so much
crazy.
for
Thank you,
giving
Shadan.
me a sliver of time. Thank you. Have a wonderful evening. And I know you got lots of interviews and I can be tedious, but I appreciate your time. It really does mean the
Thank,
world to us.
thank you so much.